This video was made possible thanks to Ayatollahs, offering unlimited data for your next trip in seconds. More on that in a moment. Let me start with a question. Did you know that there is one country in the Middle East that is caught between two giants, each pulling it in opposite directions? I'm referring to Iraq, a country that rarely gets much attention, but could be absolutely crucial to the future of the Middle East. A country under enormous pressure from two opposing forces. On one side, the United States. On the other, Iran, trying to expand its influence. And why do I say it's so important? Because Iraq is set to become the clearest reflection of just how much power the Ayatollahs Iran still has in the region. You see, in the streets of Baghdad, the murals of Shiite leaders are slowly fading, while young Iraqis are increasingly raising their voices in protest, fed up with being pawns in a game played by others. And here's the thing, right now, after Israel's unexpected strike on Damascus against the new regime in neighboring Syria, it's become clear that Iraq is the last place where Tehran still has a real chance to hold onto its influence. In fact, this is one of the most important and least talked about stories in the entire Middle East. So in this video, we're going to break down how Iraq has become Iran's final stronghold, why pro-Iranian militias in the country are less active than ever before, and whether we're about to witness the fall of the last major tentacle of the Ayatollahs regime. Ready? Let's get started. Before we dive in, let's talk about something every traveller runs into. How do you navigate a new city, translate signs, find good spots to eat, or simply stay in touch without solid internet? Let's face it, we rely on our phones for pretty much everything, but without internet, it turns into just a camera with a clock. Staying connected isn't a luxury, it's a must. That's why here at VisualPolitik, we rely on Ayatollahs. It's the easiest, most affordable way to get reliable internet abroad without racking up roaming charges. The secrets? Ayatollahs eSIM. No physical SIM swaps, no risk of losing your main card. Just a quick install and you're instantly connected in over 200 destinations with unlimited data. No hunting for dodgy public Wi-Fi, no surprise charges, just smooth, stable internet. And it's super easy. 1. Head to Ayatollahs' website or app and pick the plan that fits your trip. 2. Install the eSIM instantly, either with a QR code or straight from the app. 3. That's it. You're online and ready to message family, book rides, or explore with zero stress. With Ayatollahs' unlimited data eSIMs, staying connected while traveling has never been easier. Check the link in the description to get a 5% discount on any plan and destination with your next purchase. And now, back to our topic. To begin with, there is one thing that many of you are probably wondering. What on earth does Iran have to do with Iraq, apart from being two countries with similar names? Why do we say that what happens here is crucial to the future of the entire Middle East? Well, you see, for the Ayatollahs, Iraq is not just another country, a country with which it shares a border. No, in fact, Iraq has been their strategic corridor to Syria and Lebanon for years, and with it, the key route for maintaining their crusade against Israel. And not only that, it's also their best economic alibi. Why? You'll understand very quickly if we take a quick look back to the past. Following the fall of Saddam Hussein in 2003, Iran saw the sky open up. A broken country, with a Shiite majority, a shattered army, and a huge power vacuum. So, despite the US occupation, it was the perfect opportunity to gradually extend its political and military tentacles, placing Shiite allies in key positions in the administration and financing armed militias. And that's exactly what they did. In this way, they killed two birds with one stone. On the one hand, they challenged Uncle Sam's power with loyal men on the ground, who, as you all know, established military bases in Iraq, and a relatively friendly government after occupying the country in 2003. On the other hand, the Persians also turned the Iraqi financial system into a veritable money laundering machine for Iranian money that was subject to sanctions. Not only that, but Iraq has also become one of the main importers of Iranian products, and is by far the #1 importer of non-energy products. In fact, it is Iran's largest export market in the world, second only to China. In short, a major political and economic asset. Nevertheless, in recent years, all this has become very complicated. Following the attacks on October 7, Benjamin Netanyahu's Israel has gone all out. What can I say? Bombings in Iran, devastating blows against Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas weakened in Gaza, and even Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian ex-tyrant, exiled in Russia. The result? Yes, exactly. The once powerful Iranian octopus has lost many of its tentacles, almost all of them, except for a couple. And as I was saying, this is where today's subject comes in. Iraq. It may surprise you, but Iraq, the Iraq that was occupied by the United States, has become the last bastion of power for the Ayatollahs in the Middle East. In this country, Tehran controls dozens of armed militias and a network of influence that reaches all the way to the government itself. All these networks have one thing in common: they are Shiites, the same branch of Islam that dominates Iran. But here comes the surprise. Just a few weeks ago, when Israel launched its massive offensive against the land of the Ayatollahs, with dozens and dozens of fighter jets bombing day and night, many of those planes repeatedly crossed Iraqi airspace to reach their targets. And what did the forces located in Iraq that are loyal to Iran do? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Zero. They barely launched a few stray drones against US forces in Iraq as a token gesture. And I say stray because the pro-Iranian militias did not even claim responsibility for the attacks. And okay, maybe they couldn't have done much anyway, but the passivity was so blatant that in Tehran, they are already asking, what on earth is going on with our Iraqi allies? Have we perhaps also lost our influence in this country without realizing it? Keep these questions in mind, because the answers may be crucial to the future of the Middle East, to Israel, and indeed to the energy security of the entire world. After all, don't forget, we're talking about the most important oil basin on the planet. That's why in this video we're going to find out exactly how much power the Iranian Ayatollahs have in Iraq, where and how this relationship arose, and why the supposedly pro-Iranian militia groups haven't lifted a finger in Tehran's favor in recent months. And let me tell you in advance that many of the things we're about to tell you may surprise you, and greatly.
Out of control.
VisualPolitik community. Iraq is a veritable hotbed of armed groups that the Persians had been convinced for years that they controlled completely. In fact, pro-Iranian militia groups form what Tehran calls the Axis of Resistance, a network of guerrilla groups created, trained, and financed by the feared Quds Force, the elite forces of the powerful Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Among the most important are Kataib Hezbollah, considered Iran's hammer within Iraq, an organization that has even dared to launch rockets against US bases. Then there is Asaib al-Haq, with thousands of fighters and enormous political influence in Baghdad itself. And then there are the Badr brigades, veterans since the 1980s, and practically embedded in the Iraqi government's own security apparatus. And that's just to mention 3 examples, because the truth is that there are more than 60 of these groups, which are not only militia groups, there are also political parties, lobbies, smuggling mafia groups. In short, the whole repertoire built up over years by the Iranian Quds forces on Iraqi soil, precisely with the aim of controlling the country. But wait, some of you may be wondering, what the hell is this Quds force I keep mentioning? Well, let's see. This is important. It's the elite of the elite within Iran. It's a special operations unit of the Revolutionary Guard that is responsible for the most sensitive missions beyond its borders: espionage, sabotage, training foreign militia groups, whatever it takes. To give you an idea, if the Revolutionary Guard is the Iranian regime's parallel army under the direct command of the Ayatollah, the Quds Force is its invisible arm abroad. They are the ones who turned Hezbollah into a war machine in Lebanon, who financed and armed militia groups in Syria, Iraq, and Yemen, and who have woven the entire network that Iran calls the Axis of Resistance. In short, the Quds are the black hand of the Ayatollahs, and their influence, as we're about to see, is not exactly small. But returning to Iraq, the thing is that since 2014, many of the pro-Iranian militias have been formally integrated into the Popular Mobilization Forces, an umbrella organization that was established by the Iraqi parliament itself to combat the Islamic State. The outcome? Well, in practice, Iran controls organizations that, on paper, are part of Iraq's official security forces. But here comes the unexpected twist that Tehran did not see coming. These groups are also becoming the best example of the growing disaffection toward Iran in the country, particularly among younger Iraqis. And the clearest proof came, as we said earlier, with the total inaction during the 12-day war between Israel and Iran that we experienced just a month ago. And here comes the crucial question: why? Has Iran quietly lost its power in Iraq? Is this the final blow to the power of the Ayatollahs? Well, the answer in this case is not so simple. It's a little more complicated. And in order to understand it, we have to go back to 2003. That year, the United States overthrew Saddam Hussein, a fiercely anti-Iranian dictator. And of course, as I said before, the Ayatollahs wasted no time in setting out to colonize their new neighbor politically and economically. Why so much interest? Very simple. International sanctions over its nuclear program had left Iran gasping for economic air. They needed a bridge to get around the restrictions, and for that purpose, Iraq was perfect. For example, for years, Tehran has been manipulating the Iraqi central bank's daily dollar auctions to obtain foreign currency and finance its imports. This operation worked until 2023, when Washington blacklisted several Iraqi banks for serving as financial laundries for the Iranian regime. But this is not the only example. Iraq has also become a vital market for Iranian exports: electricity, gas, consumer goods. Tehran even puts direct pressure on Iraqi ministries to prioritize Iranian products over those from other countries. In fact, this sums up the current situation in the country very well. Take a look.
If the Americans occupied Iraq militarily, then Iran has done so economically.
Over time, Shiite militia groups have also become key players in the government itself, securing contracts with the state and pocketing more than $2 billion each year. Because these militias are no longer just armed groups, they are conglomerates. They operate commercial networks, smuggling, real estate businesses. In short, they control an increasingly large part of the Iraqi economy, following the same model as the Revolutionary Guard in Iran. In fact, they have never had as much economic power as they do now. The problem? Well, here's the key. The leaders of these militias are not exactly kamikazes. This very evolution has completely changed their incentives. They now know perfectly well that if they become too aggressive against the United States or Israel, they could end up like Hezbollah, decapitated and ruined. And believe me, the last thing these guys want now is to lose everything they have amassed over years of big business. Because yes, when you discover how profitable it is to be an Iranian proxy without getting your hands dirty, it's very hard to go back to the trenches.
These groups have become so integrated into the Iraqi state in one way or another, whether it's through business dealings, whether it's through politics. Why would these people give up on that? These groups are going to stay quiet for as long as they can.
Yes, as contradictory as it may sound, having enriched the leaders of the pro-Iranian militia groups too much has ended up alienating them from Tehran, just when the Ayatollahs needed them most, especially after the elimination of Soleimani. I'm sure that surname rings a bell. Soleimani was the mastermind between the Quds Force until a US drone, acting on Trump's orders, sent him straight to paradise. Soleimani not only coordinated Iran's foreign influence, he also kept all Iraqi factions in check, thanks to his charisma, his network of contacts, and his iron fist. But since he's been gone, Iran's influence in Iraq has been steadily declining. His successor, Esmail Khani, has not been up to the task. He has neither the charisma, nor the respect, nor the personal connections that Soleimani had and constantly cultivated. And of course, adds to that what we have said before, increasingly wealthy militias with a lot to lose if they are dragged into an open war against the United States or Israel. Well, it's a done deal. But be careful, we're missing one last ingredient: the masses. Iraqi society is getting younger and increasingly fed up. Look at the mass protests in 2019, when Iraqis directly pointed to Iran as the godfather of a corrupt and sectarian system. They even set fire to Iranian consulates in Najaf and Karbala. The militia's response? More than 600 dead. And of course, that massacre didn't exactly win Iran any friends on the streets. So since then, the strategy has been clear. Keep a low profile and avoid direct confrontation, even if it ruins Tehran's plans. In the end, it's all a bit paradoxical, don't you think? Iran made them stronger than ever, and for that very reason, they are now less useful than ever to their own godfathers. Tough luck, Khamenei. That's what you get for having allies with too many zeros in their bank accounts. Now, don't be fooled. Tehran is not sitting idly by watching its former puppets turn their backs on it. Not at all. In Iran, they are very clear. An Iraq that is too aligned with the West is a danger. Why? Because it opens the door for the Americans to use its territory to launch direct attacks against Iran, and because, at the same time, it reduces its deterrent capacity and threatens to hit them very hard economically. So the Ayatollahs have opted for a double game. On the one hand, they encourage destabilization to show that Washington is incapable of imposing any order, and on the other hand, despite everything, they continue to support local Shiite leaders who, in theory, offer some security on the streets, and who the people understand to be directly linked, naturally, to the Ayatollah regime. Be that as it may, things look bad. But why do they look bad? How is Iran's power in the country really structured, and how far does it reach? What does the United States say about all this? Well, we're going to find out right now.
A harmful symbiosis.
As we were saying, Iran has woven a huge economic network in Iraq, turning Baghdad into a veritable money laundering platform for years. But watch out, because this financial link is based on something much deeper: the political and paramilitary support we've told you about. Many still believe that Iraq is little more than a crutch for the United States since the 2003 invasion, but you only have to look at the real map of power in Baghdad to see that the story is completely different. Take a look. In 2014, the Middle East went up in flames. The Islamic State rose up against everyone, put the region in check, and plunged Iraq into a spiral of brutal violence. Mosul fell, and for weeks it seemed that the entire country could become a failed state at any moment. In fact, the weak Iraqi army collapsed like a house of cards, and the government had no choice but to turn to the Popular Mobilization Forces, the very militia groups we mentioned earlier. They forged a coalition of more than 60 factions and some 130,000 fighters. And bear in mind that it was they who, with the help of Western airstrikes, stopped ISIS. They fought neighborhood by neighborhood to regain territory. But of course, they were also the ones who answered directly to the Ayatollahs in Tehran. In this way, under the banner of the fight against terrorism, Iran took advantage of the chaos to stitch up and tighten its power base. The most disturbing thing is that these days, those seams are still there, but obviously it's not the same as before. You can see that the Popular Mobilization Forces are still operating in Iraq. In theory, they collaborate with the central government to ensure security. And pay attention, because Iranian infiltration is not limited to the paramilitary sphere, far from it. Here, a classic formula in unstable Arab countries comes into play. Parties with armed wings, and armed wings with political parties. Want an example? Well, take a look. In many districts in the interior of Iraq, the Popular Mobilization Forces have consolidated their local power by creating political parties with dozens of seats in parliament. And so, the economic ties between Tehran and Baghdad are complemented by Iranian-backed parties that are also deeply involved in the Iraqi governing coalition. One of the major ones is the Fatah Alliance, which, at its peak, had around 50 seats, although it lost more than half of them in the last elections in 2021. This group has controlled key ministries such as the Interior, communications, and transportation in various governments. Its armed wing, unsurprisingly, is part of the Popular Mobilization Forces and continues to receive money and training from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. In fact, when speaking to the media, they never miss an opportunity to declare themselves Islamic resistance against the West, at least in words. And they are not alone. Another example is the Rule of Law Coalition, with more than 30 seats and strategic portfolios such as oil. And take note, because this coalition is also aligned with the Axis of Resistance and its militia groups both within and outside Iraq. In short, the Iraqi government coalition itself includes parties with armed wings and direct links to Tehran. So yes, political parties, militia groups, contracts, and ministries form a network of favors that continues to bind Iraq to the will of the Ayatollahs. But hold on a minute, because life in the slums and towns in the interior of the country has little to do with the dynamics in Baghdad, where the institutional parties are the ones who really call the shots. For better or worse, it is from there that the big decisions are made. And this is where the current Iraqi Prime Minister, Mohammed Shia al-Sudani, Iraq's great tightrope walker, enters enters the scene. Al-Sudani embodies the Shiite faction that projects both the fragmentation of the country and foreign intervention, and that's whether it comes from Washington or Tehran. But of course, the parliamentary system forces the Prime Minister to absorb inconvenient alliances in order to maintain majorities. The result? Institutional parties end up making deals with pro-Iranian groups and their armed wings, and that obviously translates into significant political control by Tehran, at least for now. But of course, at this point, many of you may be wondering, what about the United States? Isn't it doing anything about this Iranian influence? Well, the truth is, not much. Baghdad's weakness in the face of the Islamic State made it clear that keeping the Iraqi government in place was a priority, even if that meant tolerating a little Iranian sauce on the menu. Many of us have forgotten, but ISIS had everyone in check, and this was the easiest way out for everyone. Thus, Washington ended up accepting the deployment of the Popular Mobilization Forces, the same forces that later even attacked US bases through groups such as Kataib Hezbollah. Yes, ironic, but true. This pendulum swing between Washington and Tehran has brought a certain stability to Iraqi politics. In fact, these days, Iraq is a country where dozens of pro-Iranian groups operate, while at the same time, there are US military bases on the ground. And hey, all things considered, it hasn't turned out too badly. The problem is that this balance has left the government caught in a crossfire, with no room for major reforms, or for getting the country out of the institutional deadlock it has been stuck in for many years. However, this could be changing. Iran's recent weakness in Gaza, Lebanon, and Syria is also beginning to be felt in Iraq. And if Iraq ceases to be a stronghold of the Ayatollahs, what comes next could be the mother of all battles for Persian power. Stay tuned.
The last tentacle?
The last few years have been, without exaggeration, a nightmare for the Ayatollahs. Hezbollah and Hamas have been virtually decimated. In Lebanon, for instance, the government enjoys the greatest political and military leeway in decades, thanks precisely to the collapse of Hezbollah's power. In Syria, the definitive fall of al-Assad removed Damascus from Tehran's chessboard. And now, amid this general retreat, everyone knows what the next stage in the Ayatollahs' withdrawal will be: the Republic of Iraq. And pay attention, because there are already those in Baghdad who smell blood. More than one is beginning to see Iran's weakness as an opportunity that they do not intend to miss.
Tehran alarmed by prospect of Baghdad steering away from Iran's influence. Senior Iranian officials are taking seriously the potential for a decisive rollback of their authority in Iraq, an outcome shaped by the broader weakening of Iran's regional axis.
Now, pay close attention, because at this point in the game, the Iraqi elections are looming. And this time, they will not be mere symbolic elections to reaffirm Shiite power. At the end of this year, the Council of Representatives is due to be renewed, and with it, the election of a new Prime Minister. And everything indicates an irreparable rift within the ruling party. On the one hand, those who support the re-election of Mohammed al-Sudani, who promises greater autonomy from Iran. On the other, those seeking to return the very pro-Iranian Nouri al-Maliki to office, or someone close to him. And this year, al-Sudani has already made it clear where he stands. He wants to curtail the power of the Popular Mobilization Forces to give more control back to the central government. And who do you think is behind this? Pushing for it to happen? Exactly, Uncle Sam.
U.S. steps up efforts to block funding for Iraq's Popular Mobilization Forces. The Trump administration is closely monitoring developments, openly accusing Baghdad of being a puppet of Iran, controlled politically, militarily, and economically by Tehran.
For weeks, many of the US sanctions against Iran's economic networks have been aimed directly at its militias. And just a few days ago, al-Sudani officially announced that he will seek re-election and left a few gems on the table.
After the victory, it is necessary to reorganize security and institutional reform. We will not accept the presence of weapons outside the framework of state institutions.
These statements are accompanied by several agreements that the Iraqi government has signed with the United States, particularly in the energy sector. For example, al-Sudani has already guaranteed oil concessions and cooperation programs with US companies, even beyond those with Chinese companies. And naturally, this rapprochement, coupled with his intention to curtail the power of the Popular Mobilization Forces, is already costing him dearly.
Drone attacks on oil fields in Iraq's Kurdish region shut down facilities. Earlier this month, the Kurdish regional government accused the Popular Mobilization Forces, a coalition of Iran-allied militias that are officially under the control of the Iraqi military, of carrying out drone attacks attacks.
Although no one has claimed responsibility for these attacks, all eyes are on pro-Iranian factions as the only possible culprits. In fact, they have been bombing oil fields in Iraqi Kurdistan for several days in a row, reducing production by around 150,000 barrels of oil per day. And bear in mind that 150,000 of the 500,000 barrels produced in that area is a very large percentage. Now, why on earth are they doing this? Well, many believe that these attacks against Iraq's economic engine, against oil, are intended to warn the government not to get too clever. But of course, this is where the big dilemma for Tehran arises. If they push too hard, it will only serve to fuel the growing Iraqi nationalism that al-Sudani embodies today. But if they don't make a move, Iraq could dare to seek more autonomy, a real dead end, as we've already witnessed in Lebanon, Syria, and Gaza. That said, we should not be overly optimistic. Demobilizing the Popular Mobilization Forces and dismantling Iran's political and economic influence in Iraq is a nearly impossible task. We're talking about reining in more than 130,000 fighters spread across 60 groups, as well as parties, governors, and mayors loyal to Tehran. To think that this can be achieved without violence and overnight seems pure fantasy. One need only look at Syria to realize this, and the militia groups there are not even as fragmented as they are in Iraq. But even so, Baghdad now has a historic opportunity to shake off the guardianship of the Ayatollahs. A lot will depend on what happens in the elections at the end of the year, and how far Washington is willing to go to ensure stability. Because no one wants Iraq to return to the chaos that allowed ISIS to rise. That's why, in these turbulent times, more and more Iraqis are betting on greater autonomy. Only time will tell if this marks the beginning of the end of the Ayatollahs' last great tentacle. A story that we will, of course, continue to follow here on VisualPolitik. But for now, it's your turn. Do you think Iraq will be able to disarm the Popular Mobilization Forces? Will the United States be able to help dismantle Iranian economic networks in Iraq? Could we be witnessing the loss of Iran's last bastion of power in the region? Well, leave your opinions below in the comments, and let's kick off the debate. If you liked this video, click the like button and subscribe to VisualPolitik if you haven't already. As always, thank you so very much for watching. Take care. I'll see you next time.